Hey guys, welcome again to the show. Today we're going to talk about Kydex and some of the manufacturing that goes in with Kydex and some of the handcraft and a lot of the skill and the artistry really that comes in with producing a Kydex holster. I got with my good friend in Indiana, and this is a video about making this exact Kydex holster in addition to these Kydex magazine holsters. Kydex are really useful in this day and age for inside the waistband, outside the waistband, all sorts of different applications. And we're going to try to follow him as he produces these Kydex products and try to get in there and learn more about them, some of the peculiarities of making these Kydex products as well. Thank you very much to Ventura Munitions and Proxybid. They're a huge support for the channel and they really help us get these sorts of videos out to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to bring the sort of content that we would like to bring to TFB TV. On with the video. So just to set the record straight here, I am not a master Kydex maker. I haven't even made a Kydex holster in my entire life. So this really is not a sort of how-to guide to make Kydex. I would not be the right person to ask. However, I am going to film one of my good buddies who does know what he's doing when it comes to working with Kydex and what he's doing when it comes to working with Boltaron. So with that being said, let's go ahead and we're going to watch how my buddy works through this holster. Get your overall measurements done, then you need to cut out the piece that you're going to be working with for the handgun. You're going to need to cut out two different sides, one for the left side, one for the right side. Obviously, these are going to be the same in the initial part of the Kydex holster production. My buddy here is using a simple table saw where he can actually cut through the board using his fingers moving it along. Next up, you have to heat the board up to a certain temperature that different Kydex makers use different temperatures and stuff like that. But an important point to mention here is that you can't simply reheat this holster up next time you have the pistol. You got to really specifically heat it with a heat gun instead of just putting the whole holster inside a microwave, for instance. Because obviously this would deform the entire holster instead of just the one part you want to force more retention in. Once the piece is heated up to where you need it, you can pull the piece out very quickly because it is pretty hot, and you have to pull it out and then shape it around the handgun. Usually you'd want to do this with a loaded magazine inside the handgun, or else it will start deforming your actual grip, especially if it's a polymer framed handgun. My buddy here is using two different pieces of rubber with steel plates on the other side of it and then clamping them down for a while to allow that Kydex portion to actually cool down around the handgun, leaving the imprint that you want inside of it. While he's waiting for the handgun portion to dry, he's also going to get started on the magazine portion, and he's going to do a very similar process to create a Kydex holster for the magazines, for the spare magazines. Once the holster is sufficiently cooled off, now you have the general imprint of what the handgun is going to look like. Now you need to start getting into the details and actually start cutting around where the handgun is, where you're going to start cutting those rivet points and where you're going to start cutting the holster into the shape that you want it to be in. In this case, my buddy's using a simple pencil with a ruler, and what he's doing right now is he's actually cutting down the line where the rivet points are going to be on the holster. This isn't where he's going to cut in the future for the outline of it. Once he has that rivet line sort of drawn, now he's going to cut along that line at an equal distance. He's going to drill through it, and he's going to put rivets in. Now notice he put one rivet in on the left, one rivet in on the right. That's so that the holes are the same on either side, and you don't get the holster pushing away from each other on either side of the holster. So it stays together while you're actually drilling inside of it. Next up, the holster has to be riveted down the side where you want those rivets. This is where you can use different colored rivets, different kinds of rivets, but it's pretty simple just putting the rivet in on one end and then the other and then just pressing it down with the riveting punch. After he's got everything riveted, now he's going to draw out sort of the small little crevices and the outlines of the holster where he's actually going to cut, and then where he's actually going to form the contour of the gun. And actually going to form the contour of the holster as well and along the edges there. Once he's got everything drawn, now he's actually going to cut along those lines. And this is going to involve a lot of close precision because you're going to have to get into a lot of corners, work around the edges, and cut into places that really aren't a straight line at all. There's not too much finesse that needs to be taken into consideration here because all this is going to be rounded off with a grinder towards the end of the process. Now comes the grinding, where you're going to take a grinder and the holster is going to be pressed onto the grinder nice and steady and slow so that you get those nice round corners and you don't get little sharp edges that are going to cut you. This is going to take a while as well. Throughout the whole process, he's checking out to see how the gun fits in the holster and how it fits along various parts of it. Now we get to the sort of in-depth grinding, where he takes a smaller grinder and uses his own hands to go along the outside of it, forming that real nice cut that you see on the edges there. You could probably call this dehorning a holster, really. This is one of the more time-intensive parts of it because you're going to have to pay a lot of attention to what you're doing, and you're going to have to slowly press out a lot of the Kydex and a lot of the pieces, and you're going to have to get pretty dirty doing it as well. So the next step here is he's going to start forming the inside curve. And one way to form that curve is to stick the holster into a block, wedge it down, and then use a heat gun to really move the holster down because you're weakening it at that certain point. Another thing you got to keep in mind here is that the more you heat something up, the more times you do this, the more times it becomes weaker until it becomes to the point of being very fragile. Again, always want to feel for that good retention and to see how the firearm fits in the holster overall and to see what more needs to be done to it. The last step, of course, is to make loops to put it on your belt. In this scene, my buddy's experimenting with using 550 cord to make those loops, although more traditional Kydex holsters are going to be using plastic loops that you stick on and have ends on either side, either your IWB setups or your OWB setups. Thanks very much for watching, guys. We appreciate the viewership, and we'll hope to see you next week.